Hey, Shawnee Mission North. Today we're going to be going through FERPA. So FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And it's a federal law that one of our earliest educational laws from one of our earlier ones from 1974. It protects the confidentiality of our students' educational records, and it's actually directly tied to our federal funding. It also prevents us from sharing student data without parent consent, except for a few examples, which we'll go through, a few exclusions. So some examples of educational records that we deal with all the time, guys, are student grades, health records from the nurse's office, discipline records, our students' progress reports, IEPs and 504s, academic testing results, and also attendance records. So who can access those records? Well, parents or students over 18. When students are over 18, they take responsibility for those records, and parents will then either have to gain rights or the students will have to share that information back with their parents. Also, any current students can have access. School employees, anyone who's an employee here can have access to those records. State educational agencies, officials of other schools for transfer purposes. When our students transfer, we can give them those records. And then law enforcement in cases of emergency. So FERPA has had a few updates over the past few years. One of them was the Patriot Act of 2001. So they can access student records during the course of a terrorism investigation. During No Child Left Behind in 2002, it also added that military recruiters can access student information. There was an amendment on January 8th, 2009, which added in that biometric record as a personal identifier. So fingerprints, retina, voice prints, DNA, those different things that are of biometric nature also are personal identifiers. That's with like the increase in technology, right? Things are constantly evolving, and so that was added in 2009. Campus Sex Crimes Prevention Act, also from 2002, that they can disclose information without consent if they're a sex offender or registered under the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. And then another amendment was on January 3rd, 2012, which authorized representatives to access student data for statewide longitudinal data systems. So in terms of enforcement, this was updated more recently. So on December 20th, 2018, they were finding that they were getting a lot of complaints at the U.S. Department of Education for violating complaints for violating FERPA, and so they updated their investigatory practices, so in order to increase the response time, because they were getting inundated. So a large number of those cases were really inadvertent or accidental disclosures, and so instead of going through a formal investigation, instead they started to act as intermediaries or provide resolution assistance to those people who filed the complaints and the schools to help them work through some of those essentially accidents. But there also is a formal investigation for serious offenses, and if we are found violating FERPA, the department will work with the school to bring us into compliance, and ultimately, if it doesn't work though, federal funds will be withheld, because that is how they enforce FERPA. Through FERPA, one of the things that we can do is disclose directory information without the parent or eligible student's written consent to third parties, including law enforcement officials, if we have given public notice. This information that would be shared would not be harmful. It's typically their name, grade level, awards, sports degrees, schools attended, etc. And parents need to respond in writing if they do not want that information shared. Typically, this happens for us at Shawnee Mission School District at the beginning of the school year. That email goes out to families, and if they respond in writing, then we know not to include them in the directory information. So we have some exceptions. So we can, as a school district, disclose student information when there's a judicial order or lawfully issued subpoena. We are required by law to disclose student information. In a health or safety emergency, we can disclose that information, and also in connection with a student engaged in a crime of violence or a sex offense. FERPA and citizenship status, especially in the last few years, we've seen an increase in this discord between immigration and whether students are lawfully in the country or not. All children, though, are given equal access to public education. So it is our federal obligation to provide equal education opportunities to all children living in the district. It doesn't matter what their immigration or citizenship status is. And also, unless there is an issue with the student, like there was a behavior issue or something comes up, ICE cannot seek student records as well. They can't request that we share those records. Our students are safe when they're with us in that way. We have to, especially based on the case of Plyer versus Doe, that our state of Kansas cannot deny a child's access to public education who lives in our state or any other state, regardless of their status. And also, just as a reminder, guys, we can't ask our students about their immigration or citizenship status. If they'd like to share that with us, that's up to them, but that also is private between you guys, right? So that is not an appropriate conversation to have, or appropriate question to ask. So FERPA and vendors. So our vendors are our apps, websites, learning management system, online learning programs. So for example, here at Shawnee Mission, we have Canvas and Skyward as our main systems. However, we also use other apps and websites to support students. So student data can be shared with vendors, but also the laws and regulations of FERPA also apply to those vendors. And vendors need to have those safeguards in place, especially because we as a school will be held accountable if they're not, as well as they will. Free does not mean free, right? Like we talked about this a lot with social media and how, Facebook is free. Well, it's not really free. Nothing in life is free, right? That they're using your information. You are the product, right? And they're data mining your information. And so it's up to us, like especially when I know that Canvas and Skyward and some of those bigger systems are chosen at the district level, but you as teachers may choose some other sites or some other apps to use. Just make sure, try to find compliant vendors, because we don't want to be liable for their actions. And if you have any questions about that, please reach out to an administrator or our IT department, because we're happy to help you with that process to try to find the best vendors for our students. In terms of our surveillance cameras are now in 94% of the schools, and that number was from 2016. I would probably guess that it would be higher at this point, but that was the most recent data I had. So those images and videos that we capture on camera of students are educational records. Now, if they are created and maintained by our SRO, they're not educational records or confidential unless they're provided back and maintained by the school. So there is this kind of, not a gray area, but we do work together. Parents have the right to access that image or video if it is directly related to the student and maintained by the school. So if the SRO has released that, provided that video or image back to the school, then the parents have a right to directly access that. Data destruction. So data is either kept indefinitely or for a prescribed period of time, depending on what it is. This the destruction is not necessarily addressed in FERPA, but it does say that we have to safeguard the information. We will say that depending on what it is, if it's paper copies, we need to shred them. We can be found in violation of FERPA if we just are throwing away, like for example, an IEP, and someone's able to come by and pick that up. That is that student's private information. So making sure that we are shredding those, especially those IEPs at a glance that we do. At the end of the school year, we need to be shredding all those, and there's a box in the mailroom for you guys to put those in so that we can get those shredded. If it's online, it's become it's much more difficult to destroy. So simply deleting it is not enough. It still leaves a fingerprint. IET, our IET department, is required for proper deletion of records. Please contact the SMSD help desk and they will help you through that process. It is definitely more involved, and they will help you with that. But there are quite a few records that we do keep indefinitely, such as transcripts, and some student records we do keep forever, so that students can continue to access them in the future. So here in Shawnee Mission School District, we do have policies that correspond with FERPA. So in particular, we have our general FERPA policy here that just as I mentioned earlier, they can access student records, excluding student data submitted to or maintained in the statewide longitudinal data system in accordance with our board policies. As mentioned earlier, as an exclusion. And then also we have the types of records are described in our board policies. So there's the permanent student records, as I just discussed. So those are the ones that are going to remain forever, indefinitely, and that's academic performance, attendance, activities. And then we also have administrative records and supplementary records and tentative records. And so each one of those play a different route, right? So administrative records are more the birth date, sex, race, names, telephone numbers, that like personal information. It's more about operating the educational system. Supplementary records are more sensitive in nature, so that's test data, intelligence tests, observational data, family background information. That's more classified, essentially, like just more important because it's more sensitive. And then tentative records are more things that like what teachers are keeping in their classrooms or counselors may have. So those are they're unevaluated reports that are kept on hand. And then the last part is that disposition of records. So how we get rid of records. So as a district, we say that we're going to maintain and screen them periodically. The administrative records, as discussed in the last one, should be maintained permanently for an indefinite period of time. And then our tentative records need to be destroyed at the end of their time with us. And that's something that will be reviewed periodically. And these are my references. Thanks so much, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.